Yuyu wore it into a classic Chinese novel, but unfortunately missed the right time. By the time she wore it, the story had already come to an end. The commoner woman and the male protagonist of the novel were happily together, and various villains were forced to go offline. The ending was truly heartwarming. Sadly, she was dressed as the control group daughter of the female lead's family, with her father being the villain of the original book and her mother being a malicious female supporting figure who is despised by everyone for doing bad things. Faced with the beginning of this hell, Yuyu clenched her hands and said, "Then bring your parents to a big online whitewashing." So soon the world was surprised to find that kind-hearted and gentle commoner women were actually hypocritical white lotus flowers, and high cold-faced paralyzed bullies always showed the essence of scumbags. Those who used to worship them as gods regretted it deeply. Staged various face-slapping crematoriums however, Yuyu doesn't care about these things. She just wants her parents to be okay and be a group pet Xiamengbeo that can lie flat. The villainous parents, because she has become a big shot again, are so happy that the baby can finally lie flat. How can there be so much controversy among people? The daughter of a commoner woman is a well-organized fast-dressing woman who always feels like she is the chosen daughter of heaven and has nothing to do with her. Dad, who has become a giant in the business world again, coldly looks up. Ha! Those who want to harm his daughter must go through his level first. However, before he could take action, someone was already one step ahead of him. The big shot dad looked at this stinky kid who lived next door to his daughter all day, with a pure and harmless smile, and his mood inexplicably became even more unhappy. "Xiaoyu, take a look at the two of them." Waving his small hand, he said he didn't need your help. Even without any cheating abilities, she can still press the quick to her female system on the ground and rub it PS. Both the male and female leads were real children in the early stages, and there were no romantic scenes in the early stages keywords of the novel. Hand-torn control group, old milk bag with parents makes a comeback without pop-ups, hand-torn control group, old milk bag with parents makes a comeback. Download the full text of the text, hand-torn control group, old milk bag with parents makes a comeback. Latest chapter reading. Chapter 1. Little Green Tea. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1 Little Green Tea. Today's G Family Manor is packed with guests and especially lively. Not only because the G family's business has reached a new level, but also because today happens to be the 4th birthday of the G family's beloved little princess, Lu Ruofu, the daughter of the Lu group. In the banquet hall, the 3 brothers of the G family dressed appropriately and greeted guests from all walks of life with smiles on their faces. For 4 whole years, it's finally their turn to host a birthday banquet for their precious niece. A woman wearing a light pink haute couture dress, with a small and delicate appearance and a hint of foolishness between her eyebrows and eyes, was guarded by the 3 brothers in the middle. The woman's name is Bai Ro, a daughter recognized by the G family 5 years ago. She is the sister whom the 3 brothers of the G family respect as a precious treasure. However, they may have long forgotten that there was once an older sister who raised them all, and today is the day when the other party is released from prison after serving their sentence. In the main building not far from the banquet hall, a skinny little girl stood at the staircase. She had not eaten for almost 2 days, and her small body was so hungry that she felt dizzy. She instinctively walked out of the room, smelling the fragrance, but dared to hide in a corner. In the luxurious living room below, a 4-year-old girl sits on a leather sofa, surrounded by 7 or 8 servants. The girl was wearing an ice blue starry sky skirt, with diamonds on the hem shining brightly under the light. With the diamond crown on his head, this outfit alone exceeds 7 digits. A young maid with sharp eyebrows and eyes inserted a uniquely shaped cake and handed it to the girl's mouth, saying, "This is a chocolate mousse made by a top pastry chef in Haicheng. Would you like to try it, young lady?" Lu Ruofu swallowed her saliva and shook her head obediently. "Thank you, auntie, but mom said children can't eat too much sweets." The maid sighed inwardly, not to blame so many people doting on the young lady. This child is really too well behaved. Despite being only 4 years old, he is incredibly sensible and has not been arrogant or spoiled at all. When all the servants came down, Lu Ruofu looked up and casually scanned the hall, the clarity of a child's eyes disappearing. After confirming that there were no surveillance cameras or other things in the hall, she had no further concerns and turned her head to look in the direction of the banquet hall, muttering to herself. "System, I heard from my mother that many guests came to Jijia Manor today. Have you detected any significant figures?" After saying these words, a magnetic and pleasant male voice came out of Lu Ruofu's mind. "Rest assured, the host has detected 3 individuals with a chi value exceeding 40. They are." Lu Ruofu pursed her lips in disappointment upon hearing this and said, "It's only 40. At least the Ji family can be considered a first-class wealthy family in Haicheng." She thought she could bring in many big shots. The system's emotionless statement of the fact. "The host has now gained over 10,000 likes, keep going. As long as you gain enough likes, you can open the mall and gain powerful power." Lu Ruofu's fighting spirit reignited, and the things in the system mall were unheard of in reality, just like the novels she had read in her previous life. And what she most wants to buy is the Marisu Halo, unfortunately it's worth 1 million yuan. She passed by the bogus shelf at the corner of the second floor, stepped on a chair, and casually pinched a pot of blooming orchids on the shelf. When she stopped, she accidentally broke a vase next to it. Lu Ruofu jumped off the chair and took a step back. She glanced casually and found that it was actually the favorite blue and white porcelain vase of the eldest uncle, which was said to have cost tens of millions to be photographed. It was usually only placed in the study, but today it was specially placed to entertain guests. But she didn't pay much attention either. After all, according to the affection of her uncles, as long as she casually coquettishly acted like a vase, it would shatter if it were broken. But at this moment, she looked up as if feeling something and saw the little girl standing above the stairs. The little girl is very thin, almost skinny and bony. The fluffy skirt on her body, although brand new, was loosely draped over her, showing a bit of indecency. The girl was holding a cheap dog doll in her arms, with a pair of grape-like big eyes that were hollow and dull, like a lifeless ceramic doll. Lu Ruofu stared at those beautiful, lifeless eyes for a moment, then withdrew her gaze, her small face looking inexplicable. For the past 4 years, Ji Wanwan has been a taboo that the Ji family cannot mention. Along with her daughter, who lives under the same roof, everyone subconsciously ignores her existence. So much so that it wasn't until almost 2 years old that the uncles accidentally discovered that the child was a dementia. But Lu Ruofu clenched her little hand. Even so, she had to admit that the child was too beautiful. Even if she was so thin, she was still pretty. She happened to see a photo of Ji Wanwan, who was a stunning woman with a very aggressive beauty. Compared to her, her mother with a body was like a faint little white flower. At this moment, Ji Lin happened to be leading some guests towards the main building, and the servants who heard the commotion also hurriedly came over. The 3 brothers of the Ji family saw the broken porcelain vase and the obedient Lu Ruofu standing beside them, bowing her head. Without time to feel sorry for the broken antique, Ji Lin walked over with long legs and said, "Girl, did you hurt your hand?" "Uncle, the vase is broken." Although Ji Lin felt a bit heartbroken, compared to a vase, it was obvious that the safety of kissing his niece was the most important. "Be a good girl, it's okay. Uncle, don't blame sister. Sister didn't mean to do it, sister just wanted to pick an orchid." Lu Ruofu said in a soft voice as she hesitated to speak. She instinctively looked up at the top of the staircase. The person who heard these words followed her gaze. The little girl was watched by so many people, her face still dumbfounded, and her stomach kept growling incessantly. Those present who knew the identity of the girl couldn't help but exchange glances with their companions. Ji Lin furrowed his brows. In recent years, he had only seen the child's face count, but now that he had suddenly seen her thin like this, his heart was restless for no reason. Thinking about waiting for the butler to find a doctor to show her after today, even if the woman Ji-wan-wan is malicious, he won't go and abuse a child. However, he spoke up and said, "Where is Xiaohong? Take her back. Since you have entrusted the child to you, teach her well." This statement directly confirms that the vase was smashed by this child. After all, the girl is so well behaved. How could a child lie? Completely ignored, how could a girl with almost no mental intelligence take the initiative to break a vase? Bai Ro walked over with her skirt in hand, frowning and disapproving, saying, "All right, Xiaolin, she's still a child. There's nothing wrong with a child. Wan is not here, so as relatives of this child, let's follow her more." She speaks with a natural touch of innocence and foolishness, as if she were the silly and sweet female lead in a mindless soap opera. After finishing speaking, she touched Lu Ruofu's head and said, "So is the girl. Sister is sick, so please make things easier for her in the future." Lu Ruofu nodded obediently. The two simple sentences fully explain what killing without seeing blood is. Sure enough, when the guests on site learned about the child's identity, they began to whisper and their gaze towards the little girl also became strange. After all, who here doesn't know? Miss Ji-wan-wan, who used to be so bold and unrestrained, was the most dazzling red rose in the upper-class circle of Haicheng. Not only beautiful but also talented, it is the white moonlight of many noble young masters. But later on, she did countless evil things for Lu Haochen. It is said that in order to be with Lu Haochen, she even killed Ji Dong, who raised her. Although it has been over 4 years, for some unknown reason, the evil deeds that Ji-wan-wan once did seem to have been constantly mentioned. And that incident was widely known on the internet at that time. Who doesn't know how this child came about? End of this chapter. Chapter 2. The former Miss, now a destitute female prisoner. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2. The former Miss, now a destitute female prisoner. Many noblewomen have lived under the radiance of Ji-wan-wan for a long time, and seeing her come to such an end, I don't know how happy she is in her heart. Even a lady muttered, "You deserve it, this is retribution. Your parents are malicious, and the children you give birth to are not good things." Many people actually agreed with this statement. The little girl still stood there dumbfounded, facing everyone's accusations. It is said that children who can cry have candy to eat, but she cannot cry, let alone speak up to defend herself. What? I can only stand there silently enduring the overwhelming malice, subconsciously gripping the dog doll in my hand. For some reason, seeing this scene made Ji Lin even more restless in his heart. He coldly glanced at Xiaohong, who hurriedly ran over and said, "What are you doing in a daze? Why don't you bring her back to the room?" The maid Xiaohong obediently lowered her head in response and picked up the girl. No one saw it. At the moment Xiaohong approached, the girl's body instinctively trembled. After the two of them completely disappeared at the staircase, Ji Lin calmed down and greeted everyone with a smile. "It's getting late. Everyone, hurry to the banquet hall. The food and drinks will be ready soon. Everyone here is a business person with both heads and faces, and facial expression management is a fundamental skill." The atmosphere in the living room was restored, as if what had just happened had never happened. But at this moment, the butler hurriedly walked in and whispered in Ji Lin's ear. "De Xiao, Ji-wan-wan has been released from prison. She is currently at the door and said she wants to come and pick up the child." There was a small bedroom on the second floor. As soon as Xiaohong entered, her honest expression changed, and she threw the girl hard to the ground. With a loud bang, the girl's thin and small body slammed heavily onto the floor, but she remained motionless. Xiaohong took out a thick needle from the drawer to hold the sole of her shoe, lifted the girl's hem, and thrust it fiercely as if venting. The little girl's body was painful to the point of spasms, with small blood droplets emerging from her thin and weak back. Her large, Grape-like eyes shed tears physiologically, indicating that she didn't feel the pain, but was sick and didn't know what to say about the pain. At the entrance of the Ji family estate, Ji Zheng, the second youngest of the Ji family, impatiently walked out and couldn't help but curse a foul word. He suspected that the woman was intentional, coming sooner or later, but chose to come today, causing him to have no chance to play with his obedient niece. Big brother wants to entertain guests, but little brother is wholeheartedly following by Ruji, so he can only come over. He casually glanced at the door, then his gaze froze. Under a camphor tree across from her, stood a short-haired woman wearing a wrinkled maternity dress. The woman is very thin, with her head hanging down and her spine slightly bent. 4 years of imprisonment are enough for her to engrave her lowliness and cowardice in her bones. Because there was no one to answer his release from prison, he could only wear the clothes he wore when he was arrested. Ji Zheng stared at the burn that covered almost half of her face and instinctively called out, "Big sister." Realizing what you're shouting. He cursed softly and pursed his lips with an ugly expression. The woman across from her instinctively raised her eyes upon hearing this, then quickly lowered them and said for a while. "Xiaozheng, you've grown up." Ji Zheng turned his face away from her, and his words were cruel and harsh. "There's no need to reminisce about the past. Since you treated Bai Rou like that, and since you killed your father, you have nothing to do with our Ji family anymore. Don't talk nonsense, let's talk about things." Ji Wanxi's habitual gaze drooped, only hearing Ji Zheng mention, "Dad." My eyelashes trembled for a moment. "I'm here to pick up my child." She finally raised her eyes and asked hopefully. "My child is also over 4 years old, is she?" "Okay." Thinking of the child's silly appearance, Ji Zheng's throat choked up. "Okay, you just wait here, I'll have someone bring the child over to you. Also, our Ji family has never treated that child unfairly, and we always provide the best food, and the implication is that the child's foolishness has nothing to do with them." Ji Wanwan's eyes, like stagnant water, finally showed a hint of vitality. "Okay, thank you." Ji Zheng was about to go in and order someone to bring the child over. At this moment, a gentle and graceful figure came over with an umbrella and said, "Ah. Xiaozheng, you are really, how can Wanwan stand in the sun on such a hot day?" She instructed the maid behind her, "Quickly help Miss Wanwan into the house and sit down." Ji Zheng skillfully supported Bai Rou's shoulder and said, "Sister, what are you doing here? It's so hot, what if you get heatstroke?" Bai Rou tilted her head and smiled foolishly. "I heard that Sister Wanwan was released from prison. Someone made a table of your favorite dishes, and our family sat down and had a good chat. Let's let bygones be bygones." Ji Wanwan took a step back to avoid the maid's outstretched hand and said, "No need, report the child to me and I'll leave right away." Ji Zheng snorted coldly, "Sister, why bother meddling in your affairs?" Seeing Bai Rou persisting, he felt a bit helpless and glared at Ji Wanwan fiercely. "What are you staring at? Come in now." Ji Wanwan still stood still. Bai Rou turned her head and smiled sweetly, "Wanwan sister. Don't you want to see your child soon?" When it comes to the child, Ji Wanwan felt a bit anxious in her heart and didn't refuse to step in again. Entering the Ji family estate, as far as I can see, the traces of her life have been wiped clean. As we approached the main building, we happened to collide with a group of guests led by Ji Lin Jihuai. In an instant, various gazes brushed towards Ji Wanwan, who was slightly bowing her head. Ji Lin frowned with displeasure and gave Ji Zheng a fierce glance, as if saying, "So many guests, how did you bring her here?" Bai Rou kept saying words of care in her ear. Ji Wanwan still half lowered her eyelashes. "Hate it. Maybe. When I was first caught, I really hated it. I wished I could pull that pair of dogs and die together." After 4 years in prison, she was taken special care of by her fellow inmates and lived in hell every day. Her pride was shattered bit by bit. If she didn't want to see her daughter as soon as possible, she might have gone crazy long ago. She knew that Bai Rou was doing this to provoke her to lose her temper in front of everyone, just like countless times before. But at this moment, she was powerless to care and just wanted to see her daughter soon. I don't know how tall my daughter is and how she's doing. Is it my fault for not coming to see her all this time? Would it be shameful to have such a mother like her? Ji-Wan-Wan seemed to hear nothing and unconsciously quickened her pace. Bai Rou was still chattering incessantly in her ear. You don't know, Miss Wan-Wan, how kind Xiaolin and the others were to that child. That child broke tens of millions of vases, and Xiaolin didn't say anything. The group of people in the conversation room are getting closer and closer to the main building. Immediately, there seemed to be a sound of gasping for air. Immediately afterwards, Bai Rou's face froze. The living room door was wide open, and above the staircase, an honest-looking maid went to snatch the dog doll from the little girl's hand. In the most intense competition, the maid maliciously let go. Under inertia, the little girl rolled down the stairs with a grunt. The thin and weak body was as light as a gust of wind, and in the end, it hit the armrest pillar heavily with its head. Bai Rou's words were still in her ears, but this scene was like a solid slap, thrusting back at Bai Rou's face. End of this chapter. Chapter 3. Ma Ma. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3. Ma Ma. Ji-Wan-Wan's legs softened, and she gritted her teeth and rushed towards the staircase, but she was still one step late. She shook her hands and picked up the little girl, feeling at first that she was too light. The little girl quickly bulged a big lump on her forehead, her eyes tightly closed, her curly eyelashes hanging down, and her face was thin like a kitten. A lady couldn't bear to turn her face away, while someone shouted to hit 120. Xiao Hong panicked and retreated straight. She had become accustomed to beating children privately, but she didn't expect them to turn around and come back. Ji-Wan-Wan suffered from severe angina because she had no other relatives left. After being sentenced, she gave birth to a child, and the police could only send the child to the Ji family according to their kinship relationship. Although she had never seen her daughter before, with just one glance, she was certain that it was her child. She slowly stood up and was about to take her child to the hospital. The child in her arms is as light as a piece of snow, as if it can dissipate and leave at any time. Ji Lin frowned and blocked her way, saying, "The family doctor will come over soon. If he can no longer see that the child has been abused privately, then he is not far from being blind." Ji-Wan-Wan briefly withdrew from her heartbroken emotions, lifted her head, and stared coldly at him. "Xiaolin, you think I'm malicious and sent me to prison with your own hands. I'll admit what I've done before. But Xiaolin, she's just a child. If you really don't want to see her, find a reliable nanny to take care of her. Even if you send her to an orphanage, you shouldn't let her be abused like this under your nose." Listening to her questioning tone, the hint of guilt that Ji Lin had originally felt disappeared, replaced by an indescribable sense of shame. This woman always has a preaching tone, completely ignoring the face of the head of the Ji family in front of everyone. She is far inferior to Bai Rou. So without hesitation, he said, "Ji-Wan-Wan, don't forget that you have nothing to do with our Ji family now. I have done my best to raise the child to such an old age. The implication is that you should be content." I completely forgot that he was also raised by Ji-Wan-Wan himself. Ji-Wan-Wan doesn't want to engage in meaningless arguments, she just wants to take her child to the hospital as soon as possible. At this moment, Xiao Hong quickly walked down and knelt down with a thud in front of everyone, bowing her head and crying loudly. "I'm sorry, I didn't take good care of the young lady. I'm at your disposal." She looked up and smiled in relief. "Now that Mrs. Mother is back, I feel at ease. This child is not easy to take care of. She is naturally foolish and can't take care of herself. She can't eat or drink at all. In order to make her eat a few more bites, I have put in a lot of effort. I was also feeding just now, and Miss insisted on running outside. I was in a hurry for a moment, so." She was born with an honest appearance, coupled with a heartfelt cry, people have an instinct to sympathize with the weak, and there are indeed people who are biased in their thinking. After all, taking care of a child with dementia is not easy. Xiaohong was sobbing low, but she was sneering in her heart. No one knew better than her how foolish this dead girl was. No one testified, with Ji Wanwan alone, this matter is destined to end. However, at this moment, the eyelashes of the motionless little girl in Ji Wanwan's arms trembled, and she slowly opened her eyes. That pair of beautiful black grape-like eyes finally came to life, their eyes agile and clear, like the curiosity of a nesting bird towards a new world. Yuyu looked around her eyes. Oh. My head hurts so much. Where is this? She successfully escaped. Before the little one could start feeling happy, her brain suddenly hurt, and familiar yet unfamiliar memories exploded in her mind like the speed of light. The pain made her burst into tears. These memories seemed to blend quickly with her brain through a layer of veil. A warm hand gently caressed her forehead, and a trembling, hoarse female voice came from her ear. Wake up, where else does it hurt? Upon hearing this sound, the little milk ball suddenly widened its black grape-like eyes. This voice. Mom. Is she back again? Ji Wanwan saw the little person staring at her with motionless eyes and a sinking heart. Well behaved, Mom will take you to the hospital now. As the words fell, the sleeve was gently grabbed by a small hand, and then the little man weakly shouted. Numb. Because I haven't spoken for a long time, my voice is a bit unclear. But it made Ji Wanwan shed tears directly. And the few people in the living room were all shocked, especially Xiaohong, who had a sense of ominous premonition in her heart. Seeing the subtle atmosphere and not wanting guests to see their Ji family's jokes, Ji Lin coughed lightly. Alright, since the child has already woken up, if you're not in a hurry, let's stay and have a meal for now. Ji Wanwan stared at her daughter in her arms for a moment, afraid that a wrong glance would make the little one disappear. To avoid him and continue walking towards the main entrance, he said in a low voice. Let's just forget about eating. As of now, my daughter is like this. If you have any conscience, I only beg you to send the person who harmed my daughter to prison, so that she can receive the punishment she deserves. If possible, she really wants to go ahead and tear up this woman without caring, but... She bent down her spine weakly, and 4 years of imprisonment had shattered her pride and confidence. She no longer had the courage to show off recklessly. If she had another accident, what would her daughter do? Ji Lin looked at her disapprovingly and said, when the banquet is over, I will dismiss the person. Don't make a fuss about it. Upon hearing these words, Ji Wanwan couldn't help but stop and looked up. Am I making a big deal out of nothing? She looked at me with a hint of sarcasm, but her voice was hoarse and powerless. Ji Lin, are you blind? Are you saying I'm making a big deal out of nothing when my child was ruined like this? Ji Lin's face looks ugly. Bai Rou had already resumed facial expression management, and she lowered her head in shame. Sister Wanwan is all my fault. I introduced Xiaohong back then, and I saw that she is quite honest. I didn't expect. At this moment, her expression was extremely sincere, and at this critical moment, she could confidently say that Xiaohong, the nanny who took care of Yuyu, was introduced by her, which made people subconsciously feel that she was truly ashamed of this matter. The youngest Ji Huai habitually comforted, what does this have to do with you, sister? You know people, face, but heart. Sister, you are just too kind. Yeah, it's actually nothing. Children are not easy to take care of, and this child is in such a situation. The nanny is also human, and there are times when emotions collapse. The lady who usually has a good relationship with Bai Rou agreed. The topic was unconsciously skewed, and no one really cared whether Xiaohong should be caught. Ji Wanwan pursed her lips and watched everything quietly. Are these guests all brainless? Can Bai Rou's words easily lead to biased thinking? Of course not. In fact, there are not many fools who can come here, but now Bai Rou is not only the daughter of the Ji family, but also the mistress of the Lu family. Compared to her, Ji Wanwan has just been released from prison and has a criminal record, so she may not even be able to find a job in the future. They are all business people who know how to weigh the pros and cons. It's easy to imagine who these people will help. The warmth and coldness of human relationships are nothing more than that. Xiaohong, who was huddled in the corner, breathed a sigh of relief. Knowing that she had no worries, she reverted to her old ways and couldn't help but cast a proud glance at Ji Wanwan's mother and daughter. What if you were once the towering young lady of the Ji family? Now even a nanny like me can't do anything about it. But at this moment, Yuyu, who was lying in Ji Wanwan's arms with a frown on her face, finally regained her composure as she struggled down from her mother's embrace. Looking up curiously at the familiar and unfamiliar environment around him with his little head tilted back. End of this chapter. Chapter 4. Uncle, how stupid you are. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4. Uncle, how stupid you are. She remembered it all, she really came back. Xia Yuyu was born with a memory far exceeding that of ordinary people. It's not an exaggeration to say that wherever she walked through a place, as long as it was within her reach, she could draw exactly how many tiles were distributed on the roof. She remembers her mother's voice when she first came to this world. Unfortunately, before she could see her mother's face clearly, she was carried away by someone and met a very bad aunt who always forgot to breastfeed her. Afterwards. About 2 months later, she was so hot and uncomfortable, her mind was dizzy and unconscious. Later on, I found out that it was actually a fever and confusion. Upon waking up again, she entered an antique world where she was imprisoned for 7 years due to her strong memory and learning abilities. When Yuyu saw Xiaohong, her body instinctively shrank due to being beaten for a long time. The people in the hall were still flattering Bai Rou with various flatteries. Yuyu looked around and finally walked to Ji Lin with a few short legs. Based on her memory in her mind, she knew that this was something the Ji family could decide. She looked up at Ji Lin with her little head up, and then lifted her fluffy skirt directly. The faces of everyone who was close changed greatly, and the little girl's thin back was covered in blue, purple, and countless new and old needle holes, with almost no good flesh. With her powerful memory, Yuyu quickly organized and summarized, and with her small hands, she said earnestly. A total of 4 years and 2.5 months, 1,735 days. The bad aunt almost hits me every day, a total of 5,009 times with needles, 8,501 times with her hands twisting her thighs and waist, and 908 times slapping her face. The weak little voice echoed in the hall. Although the little one was not crying, looking at the injury on her back, many people inexplicably felt heartbroken. Uncle, my mother didn't make a big deal out of a molehill. This aunt is really bad, said Yuyu, looking up at Ji Lin facing these clear and beautiful eyes. Ji Lin's expression froze. Among the 3 brothers, Ji Zheng had the most jealous personality, and immediately cursed with anger. He lifted his foot and kicked Xiaohong hard to the ground. Ji Wanwan took a step back with a pale face and saw how thin Yuyu was. She knew that her daughter had been abused in private, but she thought it was just not enough to eat, and the reality would only be worse than she imagined. Taking a deep breath, she looked up at Ji Lin again with a pleading expression in her eyes. Ji Lin, can I beg you to report to the police? Let this woman receive the punishment she deserves, just this one thing, all I ask of you is this one thing. From now on, I won't trouble you again. She arched her back slightly and spoke in a tone that was extremely humble. A few wealthy young masters thought of Miss Ji, who used to be dressed in red and flamboyant. They can't imagine that such a proud person has now become like this. Ji Wanwan lowered her gaze and didn't look at anyone. She had nothing left and didn't want to argue anymore. She only hopes that, for the sake of raising the 3 brothers in the past, she can help her once. Ji Lin was stunned. From childhood to adulthood, Ji Wanwan had always been proud. Even when she personally sent her to prison, she never gave up. And in order to force herself not to dye her hands with blood, and for the sake of her daughter, she tore off the proud shell. He believed that if possible, she would definitely kneel down without hesitation, but she still cared about this brotherly bond and couldn't bear to openly force him in this way. Ji Lin reached into his pocket and before the word "good" could be spoken, Bai Rou whispered something in Lu Ruofu's ear. Lu Ruofu walked up pitifully and tugged at Ji Lin's sleeve. "Big uncle, today is Nan Nan's birthday." Nan Nan finally looked forward to spending time with her uncles. "Last time, our grandson from Grandma Qin's family in the villa area celebrated his full moon, and the banquet was attended by a police car. Many aunties whispered that it was unlucky and unlucky. She sniffed and said, the girl just wants to celebrate her birthday happily. Can big uncle? Can we not call the police uncle over?" Xiao Hong was too malicious, and Ji Linjing was about to refuse. He lowered his head and met his niece's pitiful eyes, unable to say a word of refusal. "I think it's okay to delay for a day compared to my niece's birthday." The hand reaching into the pocket retracted, and the face turned away from looking at Ji Wanwan. "With so many guests coming today, it's not good to let the police car come. Tomorrow, I will personally take the people to the police station." Ji Wanwan weakly lowered her spine, her hopeful eyes completely darkened. "Strangely, there were not many surprises in my heart. When it comes to Bai Rou, they never stand by her side. Even if she grew up with them, even if she was not wrong, as long as Bai Rou shed a few tears, it was all her fault." Yuyu frowned in confusion. She was like a blank sheet of paper in terms of human relationships and worldly wisdom, saying whatever she thought in her heart. "Uncle, you're so stupid. These guests have all seen what they should have seen. And wait until tomorrow, what if the bad aunt runs away?" A soft voice, but with a serious tone. Ji Lin choked on being refuted by the villain. Heart said, "This child is not cute at all. He speaks too straightforwardly and is far inferior to a girl. But where is this going?" Yuyu saw that he didn't answer, but she also felt the unfriendly gaze implied by Lu Ruofu on the other side. She tilted her head curiously and looked over. "Big sister, you said it's unlucky for a police officer to come to your house on your birthday, right?" After finishing speaking, he tried hard to explain with a straight face, "Originally you were younger than me, I should have called you little sister, but you are so much taller than me, I can only call you big sister." As he spoke, he reached out two little fingers and compared their heights, which was inexplicably funny and heartbreaking. "Yeah. Lu Ruofu is 2.5 months younger than Yuyu, but she is almost 1 head taller than Yuyu. And Lu Ruofu is only the normal height of a 4-year-old child. From this point, it can be fully explained that what kind of life does this child live privately. Although Lu Ruofu is only 4 years old, she carries a soul in her 40s, so she is still able to maintain facial expression management in front of outsiders. At this moment, she just obediently lowered her face and said, It's just a name. Sister, you can call me whatever you want." Yuyu nodded her little head honestly and said, I'm very casual. Lu Ruofu. The facial expression management almost got out of control. "Big sister, haven't you answered me yet? Do you think it's unlucky for the police to come knocking today, right?" "But..." She blinked her bright big eyes and tilted her head in confusion, asking, "According to the book, it is considered unlucky to casually smash dishes and utensils at a birthday banquet. There is a curse on the families of those who have survived and are in disarray." This convoluted sentence was completely copied by her directly from a book of rites, and she couldn't fully understand its meaning. After speaking seriously, he asked, "But just now, big sister, you dropped a vase with your own hands. Is this a curse on your broken family, big sister?" Someone couldn't help but want to laugh out loud at her panting voice. "Also, the police uncle is a hero who protects the people, how could it be unlucky?" Lu Ruofu's facial expression management was completely out of control, and she fiercely retorted in a loud voice, "You're talking nonsense. The vase was clearly broken by you. What curses do you curse your family for breaking up? Why are you speaking so maliciously?" The child continued to blink her large, dull eyes. "I'm not talking nonsense, big sister. You said I knocked over the vase because I wanted to pick orchids, but please take a good look at your right hand and see if it's stained with flower juice. Also, there's a skirt here." Due to nervousness, Lu Ruofu instinctively raised her hand and realized that it was indeed there. Without hesitation, she went to cover her skirt. This scene was like confessing to herself. End of this chapter. Who exactly reported the police in Chapter 5? You are listening at novelfull.audio. This translator is experiencing an error, please try another translator. Chapter 6. The Runaway Sweetheart of High Cold and Low Land. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6. The Runaway Sweetheart of High Cold and Low Land. Not only by Ro, but also Yuyu was puzzled. She tugged at her mother's sleeve and said, "Mom, how could the police uncle suddenly come over?" Yuyu recalled another radio she had heard before, "Justice will be late, but never absent." The little man thought happily that it must be Uncle Justice who heard their call, so he sent Uncle Police to save them. Sure enough. What the book says is correct, this world is still very beautiful. But Ji Wanwan's gaze was fixed on a direction in the estate, where many guests invited by the Ji family today stood. Today's banquet was full of ups and downs, and these guests, regardless of their thoughts, did not show much emotional change on their faces. Yuyu tilted her small head and opened her round eyes to follow Ji Wanwan's gaze. Beside the crowd stood an aunt in a black dress, dressed in a more conventional way than the other guests. Yuyu frowned in confusion. She remembered this aunt. Although she was feeling uncomfortable when she first woke up, she still remembered everything that happened in the living room, including who was there, where she stood, and what they said at that time. Many people gathered around Aunt Biro and said various comforting words. Well, it didn't seem like comfort, it was more like flattering, as described in a book. And the aunt in front of her flatters the most, without any repetition in every sentence. Is it this aunt who called the police? But that's not right. Isn't she from Aunt Biro's end? Ji Wanwan looked at the slightly ordinary face across from her and suddenly remembered many years ago when she went to the Lu group to find Lu Haochen. She happened to encounter an intern who was harassed by an old employee and lost his design draft. The intern's education was average, and being able to join the Lu family was purely luck. She saw that the other party was so anxious that she was almost crying, so she immediately helped to relieve the situation. She was very busy at that time, busy with work, studies, and taking care of Ji Lin. This was really a small thing for her. If she hadn't happened to see this face, she wouldn't have remembered it at all. At this moment, Xiaohong was taken into the police car, and Ji Lin turned around and stared at her in disgust. Ji Wanwan, you're satisfied. With so many guests here today, if you ask the police to come over, negative news about the Ji family will be flying in less than 2 hours. You are always like this, impulsive and selfish, not knowing how to consider others. The most important thing is that Xiaohong shouted, "Miss Bai, save me," in front of so many people, and since Xiaohong was introduced by Bai Rou back then, those with intentions would definitely use this to slander Bai Rou. His sister was so kind. Ji Wanwan had done so many evil things in the beginning, but Bai Rou always begged for mercy for her. But Ji Wanwan not only didn't know how to be grateful, but also stubbornly pushed Bai Rou into the public opinion storm. Yuyu glared angrily at Ji Lin and said, "Don't say that to my mother. We don't have." Before he could finish speaking, he was interrupted by Ji Wanwan's voice, "That's right, I called the police." After finishing speaking, she picked up the pomelo and finally glanced in that direction. The other person turned their face uncomfortable, and she turned around and silently said, "Thank you." Seeing Ji Lin holding back her anger and staring at her, she felt a piercing pain in her heart, but couldn't resist it. She lowered her head and expressionlessly stabbed. Qingming, since you think Bai Rou is innocent, what are you afraid of? How ironic. Her brother, who was raised by her, didn't believe her, but in the end, he helped her with someone she had given a little kindness to. After taking several steps, Yuyu asked curiously, Mom, was it the aunt who called the police just now? But why? Because she wanted to make a living and because Bai Rou was the wife of the CEO of the Lu Group, she had to curry favor, and even if she wanted to help them, she had to secretly report to the police. But in front of the little person's clear and immaculate big eyes, Ji Wanwan opened her mouth, instinctively not wanting her to know these things at a young age, but not wanting to deceive her. She was about to speak, but to her surprise, the little one figured it out on her own. It must be because I am cute. Every time I get tired from practicing dancing, I can't stand it anymore. As long as I shout at the mommy in the building, their hearts will soften. They also privately said that if one day I escape, the criminals will not be willing to take action when they see my face. She looked up her little head proudly. Mom, am I very powerful? Even the criminals don't kill me. Little people actually cannot fully understand why the criminals are unwilling to kill her because of her beauty, they just feel that they seem quite powerful. However, these words made Ji Wanwan's body stiffen as she hugged her. She had been immersed in the sadness and joy of seeing her daughter at first sight, but now she regained her senses and remembered what Xiaohong had said. Her daughter was born foolish, but after this brief encounter, Yuyu was clearly much smarter than an average 4-year-old child. Thinking of some possibility, her hands and feet were icy cold. At this moment, the elderly police officer walked over and his gaze lingered on little Pomelo for a moment. Ms. Ji, could you please come with us to the bureau to make a record? Yuyu smiled politely at the police officer and said, Police uncle, hello. Faced with such a soft little girl, the police officer's serious face all year round couldn't help but slow down. Don't be afraid, leave the bad guys to the uncles. The little man curved his eyes happily upon hearing the words. Ji Wanwan calmed her emotions. It's not time to pursue these matters now. Even if it's really like she thinks. She will take good care of this child. Mother and daughter got into the police car together, and as soon as Yuyu woke up, she had fallen off such a high staircase and arrived at the police station. As soon as she started taking notes, the little person fainted in front of her. In the noisy hospital, you were lying on the hospital bed, just hanging a bottle of drip, your brain was confused, and you could smell the smell of rice in your breath. The little guy was in Ji Wanwan's arms, his eyes were not open, and he was drinking porridge by instinct. Ji Wanwan gently followed her back and almost shed tears. How long have you been hungry? Thinking about my daughter's various physical examinations, long-term abuse, severe malnutrition, and even affecting bone development, from the perspective of traditional Chinese medicine, it is almost equivalent to damaging the root cause and taking a long time to recover. She clenched her fist tightly, but in the end, she weakly released it. In the next few days, apart from eating and using the restroom, the little one was almost asleep. If it weren't for the doctor saying that this was a normal response of the body under self-repair, Ji Wanwan wouldn't have been so anxious. But no one knew. Yuyu closed her eyes tightly and was working hard to digest the excess in her brain. Until 3 days later, the little one opened his big black grape-like eyes and looked at the snow-white ceiling in confusion. A young child whose mind does not exceed 7 years old in both past and present lives can only analyze the current situation from countless books she has read. Not long after she was born, she was killed by a bad ant. Probably not completely. More than half of the soul went to another world, settled in another person, was imprisoned for 7 years, died unexpectedly after 7 years, and then returned. I thought my situation belonged to the spirit of borrowing a corpse to revive a soul in the supernatural storybook, but reality will only become more complex. She wore it into a storybook. That is, a novel. The title of the novel is, Gao Leng, Lu Xiao's runaway sweetheart, it is a typical ancient early hegemonic essay. It tells the story of Bai Rou, an ordinary single-parent girl who did not graduate from college. She worked as a nanny for Lu Haochen, the eldest and youngest of the Lu family in Haicheng, and then ignited a spark of love in their daily interactions. In the end, Cinderella and the prince experienced numerous hardships and lived happily together. At first glance, it sounds quite beautiful, but the little one furrowed his brow in confusion. The female protagonist Bai Rou is the mother of her eldest sister, Lu Ruofu. Why does Bai Rou in the book always inexplicably slip and fall, and even fall right into Lu Xiao's arms, sometimes even mouth to mouth? After estimating the weight of an adult woman, the little one instinctively touched his teeth. With such a strong impact, he might have knocked out his teeth. Oh! It hurts so much just thinking about it. Aunt Bai Rou also seems to have a strong ability to fall. In the book, from male 1 to male 4, Aunt Bai Rou often accidentally falls into their arms accurately, sometimes even performing a gorgeous spin. And those few male supports actually think that Aunt Bai Rou is so cute. Hey! The world of adults is so strange. And Mother Ji Wanwan is the fiancée AE of the male lead Lu Haochen, and the two are childhood sweethearts. Both parents have already set a marriage date. But at this moment, Lu Haochen met his destined goddess Bai Rou, so Ji Wanwan naturally became the third party hindering their great love. Seeing this, Yuyu became even more confused. Mom and that Lu Haochen were already unmarried couples. How could it become a third party? To be placed in the world before her, Bai Rou is the big maid in the young master's courtyard who behaves recklessly and will be stabbed in the spine. Even more puzzling is the male lead Lu Haochen, who only uses Ji Wanwan as his sister while enjoying the resources provided by the Ji family to accompany Ji Wanwan to various banquets. It's all adults now. If you really don't like Ji Wanwan, have the ability to terminate your engagement first. Although as a young child, she still doesn't understand any emotions or love, she is inexplicably angry. The most frustrating scene was when Lu Haochen promoted the female lead Bai Rou to become a secretary in the CEO's office. Surrounded by high-achieving students who have come out from scratch, Bai Rou doesn't even know how to do Excel spreadsheets, and her daily work is full of difficulties. However, the male lead thinks that such a woman is so cute and special. Once, Bai Rou spilled hot coffee on Ji Wanwan's dress, and Ji Wanwan said, Bai Rou is not suitable to stay in the CEO's office. As a result, Bai Rou blushed and exclaimed, I will compensate for this piece of clothing. Rich people are amazing, they can trample on the dignity of others casually. After finishing, she covered her face and ran away in anger. But as Ji Wanwan's fiancée, Lu Haochen didn't want to pursue her. Later on, everyone turned to the female protagonist Bai Rou, as if everything Bai Rou did was right. Under the impulse of Ji Wanwan, she gradually darkened and did many absurd things. Finally, he was sent to prison by the joint efforts of Lu Haochen and the three brothers of the Ji family. Yuyu pursed her lips. There were some things she couldn't fully understand yet, but she just felt that her mother was not wrong. Even if my mother was really wrong, she received the punishment she deserved. Xia Chuanzi clenched her fists, she had to eat a lot of food, grow up quickly, learn powerful skills, and protect her mother. Open a new book. The female protagonist, Yuyu, has a full level of intelligence, the kind that is unforgettable and learns quickly, but because the female protagonist was a child in the early stages and didn't understand much about human relationships and worldly wisdom. Emotional intelligence needs to be improved. After all, we are still babies, we can't be all-powerful in every aspect, can we? Don't be intimidated by the first few chapters, strictly speaking, this is still a refreshing article. In addition, this article is fictional, and some background events were fabricated by me for the sake of the plot. Please do not blindly substitute them. The last and most important point is, the little cuties who have the chance to browse this book. Move your beautiful hands and join the bookshelf. If you think books are not fat enough, you can also fatten them up before slaughtering them. Ball ***, end of this chapter. Chapter 7. Qingming Riverside Map in the High School Entrance Examination. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. Chapter 7 Qingming Riverside Map in the High School Entrance Examination. 2 more days later, Yuyu's spirit improved a lot, except for the injuries on her body caused by Xiaohong's abuse. There were basically no major issues. Mom went down to line up for dinner, and Yuyu leaned against the bedboard, playing with the electric pig that Mom bought her yesterday. Da-da-da. With a gentle press of the switch, the pink pig's limbs began to move, accompanied by enchanting music. Over the past 2 days, combined with more cohesive memories in her mind, she has gradually adapted to this world. Knowing that bathing can automatically generate hot water, and there is a carriage flying in the sky. In short, this is a very magical world. There is a middle-aged aunt and an older sister wearing a high school uniform living in the adjacent hospital bed. The school uniform sister is holding her phone and focusing on watching videos, occasionally clenching her fists and screaming softly. Yuyu approached curiously and saw a good-looking little brother dancing in the video. Why does sister laugh so excitedly? Does sister know him? The school uniform sister didn't lift her head and spoke excitedly. Of course I do. This is my male god, my new wall top. Yuyu tilted her head and blinked her big eyes, saying, what is a wall? Does sister have many walls? Upon hearing this, Zhang Xiaoxiao finally put down her phone. She was so adorable by the way Yuyu tilted her head that she couldn't help but nod her nose and say, don't ask around like a child. Yuyu flattened her mouth and, like all children, disliked listening to this sentence the most. Seeing her school uniform sister start bowing her head to swipe her phone again, she couldn't help but remind her, sister, there are still 10 to 20 seconds left before Auntie's drip ends. Be careful when Auntie wakes up and scolds you. Zhang Xiaoxiao raised his head irritably and glanced at the set alarm on his phone. Seeing that there were indeed 10 minutes left, he couldn't help but become even more irritable. Glancing at the mother with tightly closed eyes, she didn't dare to delay any longer. She rudely opened her backpack and pulled out an English test paper, unfolding it with a clatter. Yuyu was stunned and said, ah. Sister, your answer sheet is so long. It's 40.8 feet. Zhang Xiaoxiao sneered, that's right, you haven't heard of it. The college entrance examination in Jiangsu province is in a hell mode, and the English test paper alone is only 1.6 meters long, known as the Qingming River map in the college entrance examination world. Yuyu exclaimed again, wow. Although she didn't quite understand the hell mode, she sounded very impressive. Then he issued a soul torture and said, can you finish it in such a short time, sister? Auntie needs to be checked when she wakes up. Zhang Xiaoxiao snapped his fingers and said, it's not a big deal. After finishing speaking, she picked up a brush and started writing. Yuyu watched in surprise as she walked through the motions. In less than 5 minutes, she was able to complete over 100 questions, including her essay. Yuyu. Seeing Xia Chuanzi staring at her with round eyes, Zhang Xiaoxiao's proud eyebrows deliberately smiled and teased her. Shocked. Worshipped. Sister, I'm a genius who never forgets that kind of thing. You know, the god of learning. You can score high even by rolling around with your face. Yuyu shook her head with a small face and said, sister, you're lying. Sister didn't even look at the question. She thought for a moment and said, for multiple choice questions, choose the shortest option based on 3 strengths and 1 weakness, and choose the longest option based on 3 weaknesses and 1 weakness. Choose B if you have different strengths and weaknesses, choose D if you have different strengths and weaknesses, and choose C if you can't make up your mind. Then he gestured with a small hand and said, the reading questions were copied directly, and the final essay was also included. Sister, am I right? Zhang Xiaoxiao was completely shocked and said, little sister, you understand. Then he cast a glance that was only understandable among the scumbags. Yuyu shook her head inexplicably and said, I guessed it based on my sister's problem-solving rules. She had learned almost all traditional Chinese characters in less than half a year in that world. Although she didn't know much about simplified characters, she had a good memory. Yesterday, she listened to her school uniform sister read a CD and remembered it. Zhang Xiaoxiao obviously didn't believe it. If you're a scumbag, then you're a scumbag. It's not embarrassing. Yuyu asked honestly, what is academic scum? Zhang Xiaoxiao was about to answer when a cool voice came from behind. Your sister is called a scumbag. Zhang Xiaoxiao was startled and quickly turned her head. She saw that her mother, the master, had already woken up at some point and was staring at her in a secluded manner. Zhang Xiaoxiao reacted quickly and quickly took out the textbook from his backpack. He closed his eyes slightly and quickly recited. The late emperor's entrepreneurship was not yet halfway through, but the middle path collapsed. Today, the world is divided into 3 parts. Yuyu, sensible enough not to disturb her, stared at the ceiling in a daze, thinking about when her mother would come back. I don't know what delicious food will be today. Thinking of the French fries her sister gave her in school uniform the day before yesterday, she couldn't help but swallow her saliva. Unfortunately, her mother said that her spleen and stomach were too weak to eat those junk foods for now. Little people don't understand why all the delicious food is junk food. After a while, the older sister in the school uniform was still reciting, General Xiang Chong, with a gentle demeanor and a smooth military demeanor, suitable for. Suitable for the past, Yuyu couldn't help but whisper a reminder, yes. It applies to the past, and the late emperor claimed that the day could. At this moment, Ji Wanwan walked in with a lunchbox in her hand. Zhang's mother couldn't help but praise her, your little girl is really smart. I don't know how you taught her. She can recite, a teacher's role model, at such a young age. Ji Wanwan held the lunchbox tightly and lowered her head without saying a word. Upon hearing the commotion, Yuyu turned back happily and said, Mom, you're finally back. Looking up at his mother's face, he couldn't help but be startled and said, Mom, what's wrong with you? Why is your face so pale? Ji Wanwan's hand withdrew silently, calmed down, and said calmly, It's nothing, I think I've been tired these past few days. Let's eat quickly. After speaking, he opened his lunchbox and a tempting aroma of pork ribs wafted over his face. However, Yuyu couldn't care about her craving and frowned as she stared at Ji Wanwan. Then, she reached out and grabbed Ji Wanwan's pulse, beginning to concentrate and check her pulse. During the 7 years she was imprisoned in another world, she was ordered to learn many things, including medical skills. However, although the teacher in charge of teaching her medical skills was a world-renowned doctor, he seemed to look down on her very much, so he spoke very quickly in every class and did not give her the opportunity to practice. Although Xia Yuyu has a wealth of medical theory knowledge, apart from herself and a few other mothers around her, she has not yet taken her pulse seriously. What did Ji Wanwan realize? His face turned even paler, and instinctively he withdrew his hand and spoke first. Mom is really fine. Just now, I encountered a little sister who was injured and urgently needed a blood transfusion. My mother's blood type matched exactly, so she helped donate some blood and rested for 2 days before recovering. Is that so? Yuyu blinked her big eyes in disbelief. She hadn't had a chance to carefully diagnose her pulse just now, but the initial pulse did show excessive blood loss, but she always felt that something was wrong. Zhang Xiaoxiao, who was in the second phase of the project, couldn't help but want to interject and mock upon hearing this, but was stopped by Zhang's mother's fierce glare. Ji Wanwan served a bowl of pork rib soup and handed it to Yuyu, saying, Mom is really okay. Yuyu temporarily put aside her doubts and pointed to the remaining soup, saying, Mom, you also drink it. If you lose too much blood, you need to eat more good food to make up for it. With a serious tone, Ji-won-won couldn't help but smile, and her already dark and muddy heart seemed to be infused with a glimmer of light. Okay, Mom also drinks. It was noon, and the ward was very quiet. Sister in school uniform went to school, while Aunt Zhang and another uncle were both looking at their phones. Yuyu leaned against the pillow, looking at her mother sitting at the bedside. At this moment, the sunlight outside the window happened to fall on the intact half of her face. From a distance, the profile of her face was exquisite to the point of impeccability, except for a slightly dull look in her eyes and an indelible gloom between her eyebrows. The little man sighed, and his mother had been sitting motionless for 40.5 minutes. In the past few days, except for necessary things, when she has free time, her mother just sits there with her eyes down and doesn't move. She knew that her mother might be sick, and it was a very serious illness, and taking medicine would not cure her. Yuyu frowned in distress as she wanted to make her mother happy. Looking outside, she decisively sat up and put on the rabbit slippers her mother had bought. Coincidentally, her pajamas were also in the shape of a little rabbit. She playfully jumped a few times, and her long rabbit ears swayed along, making her burst into laughter. Coupled with a clump of silly hair on her head, she was inexplicably cute to the point of committing a foul. Ji-won-won finally came to her senses and said, "Do you need to use the restroom?" Yuyu shook her head and tugged at Ji-won-won's sleeve, saying, "Mom, I don't want to stay in the hospital room. Shall we go out and take a walk?" The soft little milk voice made people reluctant to refuse. Coincidentally, Ji-won-won also had some things to ask her, so she nodded and bent down to embrace her. Yuyu looked at her mother's pale face and walked forward with her small body spinning and clattering. After leaving the ward, they arrived at the tree-shaded corridor downstairs for people to rest on. They looked around curiously, looking east and west. There are many people at the entrance of the hospital. She likes places with many people and also enjoys the hustle and bustle. Seeing her mother looking at her hesitantly, Yuyu waited for a long time, but before her mother could speak, she had to take the initiative to ask, "Mom, what's wrong with you?" Ji-won-won pursed her lips, looked around, and finally couldn't help but ask in a low voice. "Who are you?" After asking, she turned her face away and didn't look at her, but her hands unconsciously clenched tightly, afraid of hearing a certain answer. But she knew very well that from the current situation, the result was already very obvious, wasn't it? But the little one's puzzled voice rang in his ear. "I'm Yuyu, my mother's daughter." Ji-won-won suddenly raised her head, clearly questioning what she should have. After all, there are so many flaws in the pomelo that no one can think too much. Ko lowered her head and met the clear eyes of the little person. For some reason, she instinctively believed that Yuyu had not deceived her, and that her daughter was in front of her. Her heart relaxed slightly as she pulled her to a deserted corner. Just in case, she leaned in her ear and whispered, "Tell Mom, why do you know how to recite, become a teacher's model, and how to practice medicine?" Yuyu blinked her eyes, and as she didn't have a very high emotional intelligence, she finally realized what her mother wanted to ask. So she didn't hide it, and also followed her mother's example and whispered in Ji-won-won's ear. Speaking of her amazing memory from birth, she remembered her mother's voice. She was abused by Xiao Hong, had a fever, and her life was in danger. Her 3 souls and 6 souls went to a different time and space. Tell me about her experiences in that world. End of this chapter. Chapter 8. Bringing Sun to Propose. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8. Bringing Sun to Propose. When I woke up again, I arrived at Dajingcheo, a world full of antiquity, and turned into a 7-year-old sister. The young lady was originally an official woman, but she was born foolish. Her parents have never liked her. Later, the young lady's family committed a crime and was robbed of her home. She was sold to the flower house, and the young lady was afraid of going home. The thug uncle gave her a fierce push, and the young lady hit her head on the corner of the table and died. Later, she became me with some childish narration, but it can also make people understand at once. Ji-won-won pursed her lips and couldn't help but hold the little one tighter. I have recreated the events in my mind. She was sentenced to 4 years for kidnapping and gave birth to a daughter more than 6 months after her conviction. According to the law, she will be taken away to serve her sentence. And she no longer had any relatives in this world, so the police handed over the child to Jilin. She originally thought that although it was later discovered that she was not the daughter of the Ji family, considering that she had raised the 3 brothers since childhood, even if she didn't like this child much, and even if there was any instigation from Bai Rou, she would still give her a bite to eat and raise her safely. But she underestimated human selfishness and overestimated her weight in the hearts of Jilin. Xiaohong not only abused children, but also directly harmed her daughter's life. At that time, the pomelo was only over 2 months old. Having a fever for 2 days and 2 nights, not a single member of the Ji family noticed. Yuyu was still whispering, "I was just a little baby back then, I didn't understand anything, I couldn't even speak." However, the uncle of the flower tower owner looked at my face and still left me behind. I'm super smart. In just 1 month, I learned to speak and also learned to eat and dress by myself. Although Yuyu was born much smarter than others, she used to be in a baby state and was unable to learn how to speak. Later, my boss uncle discovered that I was so smart and tested me many questions. He was very happy to see that I answered all the questions correctly. Later on, he took me to a big house and named me Yuyu. For some reason, he changed it to Yuyu. I have to learn a lot of things every day, including music, chess, calligraphy and painting, dancing and singing, embroidery, tea and flower arrangement, gardening design, cooking, and medical skills. Ji Wanwan's heart tightened, and it took a great deal of effort to learn each one well. It's hard to imagine how tired such a small person should be every day. She touched Yuyu's little head and whispered, "Is it Mom who's useless and caused Yuyu to suffer?" A soft little hand touched her sour eye socket and said, "Mom, don't be sad. You learn things quickly. Except for the teacher who teaches medicine, all the other teachers like me very much. Although it's a bit tough, as long as you do the homework assigned by the teacher well, you will have delicious food and many playmates." Ji Wanwan was somewhat surprised and followed her words, asking, "Oh, what kind of playmates do you have?" Many, there are tigers, big girls, iron eggs. Speaking of which, her tone suddenly became a bit low. But they disappeared soon. As long as she performs well, the housekeeper in the building will bring many children to play with her, all of whom are between the ages of 3 and 4. However, at most after a year, when she and her friends develop feelings, they will be taken away and a new group of children will come over. Over and over again, year after year, the little girl's heart grew increasingly tired, and eventually she couldn't play with those new children anymore. I actually have a rough idea why my boss wants me to do this. They want me to grow up and be a child forever. But I don't understand why they don't let me grow up. The little person wilted and pounded his head, saying, "I once overheard a conversation between my uncle and a monk grandfather. The monk grandfather said that my soul is incomplete, but I am naturally intelligent and have a special destiny. As long as I have more exposure to the world, with time, my nature will be no different from that of a normal person. Moreover, fate is priceless and may change the fate of the country in the future." Uncle Dong seemed very happy upon hearing this and asked what would happen if I were not allowed to interact with the outside world. The monk's grandfather replied, "I was already mentally incomplete. If you keep me locked up, I will always be a young child in my heart." Ji Wanwan clenched her fists. She kept feeling strange. Although Yuyu seemed to know a lot, she spoke and acted like a child of a certain age. It turned out that this was the truth. Someone with a heart doesn't want her to grow up, and the reason is obvious. What is Hualu for? The girls inside are carefully tamed and then sold for a price when they grow up. Those people who put so much effort into cultivating pomelo naturally want to dedicate her to influential people with special interests. Wait, you said you went to Dajingcheo, do you still remember the era name at that time? Yuyu blinked inexplicably and said, "Remember, it was the 3rd year of Yongtai, and the reigning emperor was Emperor Yongtai. I heard that he was a very good emperor. Ji Wanwan lowered her eyes, concealing the chilling pain in her eyes. Those who have studied history know that the dying dynasty not only produced a group of renowned officials such as Xie Jingzi, but also many peculiar emperors, among which the most notorious was Emperor Yongtai, not only because he died in an extremely disgraceful manner, but also because of his perverted habit of hiding under hypocrisy. Hundreds of girl corpses were dug up under his dormitory after his death. And from Yuyu's few words, it can be seen that it is definitely not an ordinary flower tower. The thoughts of the people who domesticate pomelo have become clear. Perhaps due to the child's nature, Xia Yuyu didn't have much feelings about these things except for the mothers who missed taking care of her. She didn't necessarily have to ask for an answer. Seeing her mother's forehead sweating profusely, Yuyu tenderly picked up a flyer from the ground and folded it several times into a fan. With her small hand, she vigorously helped her mother breathe and fan the wind. Ji Wanwan's heavy mood slightly eased, and she took the small fan to gently fan the wind for the pomelo. She hesitated and asked, "So, how did you come back to this world?" Facing her daughter's lively little face, she couldn't even say the word death. "In my 7th year there, when I was already 14 years old, I had already completed all the necessary studies of music, chess, calligraphy, and painting, surpassing the gentleman," said Xia Yuyu, feeling very heartless after speaking. He tilted his head back and looked proud, seeking praise. Ji Wanwan gave a face-saving compliment and said, "Our pomelo is great." The little one was satisfied, then a little down. Later on, the gentlemen all left. She pouted and said, "If I had known, I wouldn't have surpassed them. I was too bored, so I led my guard uncle to move a ladder and tried to climb over the wall. However, I climbed too high and drowned in the lotus pond." Ji Wanwan said. For a moment, she didn't know whether to be sad or grateful. The first thing that came to her mind was that the owner of the flower tower was probably going to be extremely angry. So, the actual age of pomelo is less than 7 years old. After playing downstairs in the hospital for a while, Yuyu reluctantly returned. Ji Wanwan repeatedly reminded that these things should not be told to anyone, nor should she casually reveal what she knows in front of outsiders, otherwise she will be taken away for research. Upon hearing that Yuyu would be taken away and locked up, her head immediately shook like a tambourine. The outside world is so fun, she should never be locked up again. Passing through the outpatient building, a group of people gathered in the distance. As they approached, a man in a straight suit took a large handful of red roses from his assistant's hand and handed them to the beautiful woman wearing a white coat across from him. "Liang Wan, if you marry me, I will treat you well and fulfill the responsibilities that a husband should have." The man has a handsome profile, a cold demeanor, and a domineering aura all over his body. A burst of screams and commotion came from around. The woman who was given the flowers had a calm expression and said, "Mr. Shen, as I mentioned before, that was an accident. I don't blame you. We are all adults now, and you don't need to marry me for the sake of responsibility." Beside the man, there stood a chubby little boy aged 5 or 6, sucking on a lollipop and squinting his eyes as he looked left and right. Yuyu curiously stared at the electric toy in the little boy's hand and whispered to his mother, "What are they doing?" Ji Wanwan adjusted the bunny sun hat on her head and said, "That uncle is proposing to auntie." After understanding the meaning of the proposal, Yuyu pointed at the little boy and asked curiously, "Bring your son to propose?" Maybe. After all, the divorce rate is quite high now. But no matter what, it seems difficult to propose with the son born to his ex-wife. A young nurse beside her couldn't help but be enthusiastic about popularizing science when she heard their conversation. "What? That child is Liang Wanjie's biological son. 6 years ago, Liang Wanjie worked part-time at a bar and had an unexpected relationship with Mr. Shen. She became pregnant and had a child. Liang Wanjie had a special physique and could not have an abortion casually, so she had to give birth to the child. What happened later? Yuyu couldn't help but urge, while still staring at the electric transformer in the hand of the little boy across from her. The little nurse couldn't help but tug at the rabbit ear on her head, and didn't think such a young child could understand. However, seeing several family members around who were watching the excitement also listening, she spoke even more vigorously. At that time, Liang Wanjie happened to have received an admission spot from a prestigious foreign school. She didn't want to give up her dream, so she secretly left her child at Mr. Shen's doorstep. That night, Mr. Shen drank too much and didn't see Liang Wanjie's face clearly. However, after confirming the accuracy of the DNA test, the elderly couple of the Shen family happily raised their child by their side. Next, 5 years later, Sister Liang Wan returned to China after completing her studies and unexpectedly met Mr. Shen with her son at a dinner party. After a series of Anyway, it's all about chasing after each other and then sparking love. Then Mr. Shen discovered that Liang Wanjie was actually his child's biological mother, and now it's even worse. It is obvious that things after returning to China were all done by the little nurses themselves. However, a female high school student around her excitedly recited the current dog blood meme. My best friend and boyfriend conspired to ruin her innocence, but she accidentally had a relationship with the CEO of the richest man. 5 years later, she returned with her genius and cute treasure, and they met at a banquet. The tall man leaned her against the wall, his lips curling up with a sinister sneer. Woman, you can't escape. So romantic, this is a safe novel that shines into reality. The little nurse also exclaimed repeatedly, isn't that right? Sister Liang Wan is really happy. Some onlookers around also felt that their fate was wonderful. After listening, Yuyu just let out an uninterested, oh, sound. Such a beautiful little cute treasure, naturally makes people want to get close to her. The little nurse couldn't help but laugh and tease her, why is this expression that my sister said wasn't good? Yuyu shook her head and said, no, my sister said it very well, but I can't figure it out. Since Aunt Liang Wan didn't want her little brother, why didn't she take the anti-fertility medicine at that time? She has read many medical books and theoretically knows how to have a baby. But, while Aunt Liang Wan said she didn't want her little brother, she also gave birth to the child and sent it to the Shen family. Can she still happen to meet her after returning to China? Little people always feel that something is strange. Is it Auntie Liang Wan who doesn't know how to take antipyretic drugs? But that's not right. Aunt Liang Wan is studying medicine. With just one sentence, the little nurse was stunned for a moment and then sneered, Children know so much. End of this chapter. Chapter 9. Another White-Eyed Wolf. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9. Another White-Eyed Wolf. Upon hearing these words, Yuyu looked at her mother and shrank her neck with a guilty expression. Mom said she can't show her medical skills in front of outsiders. She didn't control her mouth well, and Yuyu suddenly felt a little scared. Will she be caught and locked up by bad people? Ji Wanwan, who would be willing to blame her daughter for this meeting? Touching her little head, she lowered her head and apologized to the nurse, I'm sorry. I usually watch TV, and I don't know when this child learned to speak. Childlike innocence, and such a cute treasure, the little nurse naturally wouldn't mind and smiled and waved her hand. Yuyu knew she had made a mistake, so she obediently let her mother lead her. As she passed by Aunt Liang Wan, she happened to hear her talking to the little boy. Ruerue, wait a moment. Mom will take you to dinner after work. Yuyu suddenly raised her small face and stared blankly at the other person's back for a while. Ji Wanwan saw her daughter standing still, picked her up, took a few steps, and softly asked, what's wrong? Yuyu hesitated and said, I should have seen this aunt before, but... She frowned in distress and said, but I can't remember where I've seen her. Ji Wanwan didn't take it seriously and said, if you can't remember, forget it. Whenever we go out, we will encounter pedestrians. How can we remember everyone? But I can just remember everything. This is a very unusual thing in Yuyu's eyes. From birth to now, as long as she has seen someone, even if it is just a fleeting back, no matter how long it has been, she can always remember it clearly. She took another serious look at Aunt Liangwan's back. Hey. Where have you seen it before? However, she thought for a long time but didn't remember it, so she didn't hesitate anymore and continued walking towards the inpatient department with her mother. Liang Wan, who was talking to the little boy, turned her head as if feeling something. When she saw Ji Wanwan's face, her expression stiffened. She couldn't help but quickly glance at Shen Yan holding flowers across from her, with a hint of guilt and embarrassment flashing through her eyes. Ji Wanwan looked at the elegant woman in a white coat across from her. I can't help but think of many years ago, when she brought Ji Zheng, who was injured in a fight in the second phase of the middle school, to the hospital to bandage his wound and queue up at the emergency department. There was a commotion in front of her. A girl with 2 fried dough twists braids and a snakeskin bag flopped down at the doctor's feet and cried. "Doctor, please help Sister E, I'll treat you like a cow and a horse." The girl spoke in a dialect. After finishing speaking, he cowed out his head in a daze. The doctor took a step back and frowned in embarrassment. "Girl, get up first. This is not in line with the rules." It's not that he's indifferent, but once this kind of thing starts, what do other patients do? The girl sat down in despair, holding on to the doctor's clothes without letting go, and the scene froze for a moment. Ji Lin impatiently pressed her wound and was about to leave. Half an hour later, Ji Wanwan had an important collaboration project to discuss. She didn't want to waste time, so she took out a card from her bag and handed it to the doctor, saying, "I'll pay for her surgery." Until now, she still remembers the grateful and simple gaze that the girl had when she finally looked at her. The girl kowtowed heavily to her back and said incoherently, "Benefactor, this amount of money will definitely be repaid." At that time, she only smiled when she heard it. 100,000 yuan was a lot for ordinary people, but for Miss Ji at that time, it was just a good meal. However, she was still very happy to help others. However, times have changed. When we meet again, the once destitute village girl has now transformed into an elegant and generous returning female doctor, while the young lady who used to spend money recklessly now cannot even afford her daughter's medical expenses. That day, while holding the payment receipt, she hesitated and finally stopped Liang Wan, talking about what happened back then. Unexpectedly, upon hearing this, Liang Wan instinctively glanced away from her and immediately put down her file bag, frowning and looking distant. "This lady may have mistaken the person. I have never seen you before, and you said you lent me money, so. What about the promissory note?" With just one sentence, Ji Wanwan was speechless. Ji Wanwan didn't argue anymore and turned around and left. "Because if we continue to argue, it will only bring shame to ourselves." Liang Wan took a few steps forward to distract Shen Yan's gaze, took the little boy's hand and walked quickly forward. Shen Yan followed suit with flowers, and from a distance, the family of 3 was extremely harmonious, causing a burst of laughter from colleagues around him. Ji Wanwan withdrew her gaze and led Yuyu back to the ward. Yuyu slept for a while, and a few days ago, the police officer who captured Xiaohong came over with people to take unfinished notes from the previous session. With the lesson from before, Yuyu was careful not to say anything that shouldn't have been said. Ji Wanwan also presented a pre-prepared injury assessment and said that it was Xiaohong's improper care that made Yuyu fever for 2 days and 2 nights foolish. A young female police officer following behind gritted her teeth in anger. Officer Wu's expression was quite calm. His gaze was fixed on the small lump of milk nestled on the hospital bed, and he tried to slow down his voice. "Tell uncle, how did you recognize Li Hong at that time?" Yuyu gently tugged at the tail of the electric pig and said to herself, "You can recognize it at a glance. Isn't it just face changing? Put this in front of the facial contouring technique she once learned. Don't be too low. Level, okay?" But the little one also knows that these words cannot be spoken casually. So he followed his mother's teachings. Because I'm with the bad aunt every day, I recognize her right away. This is not a lie either. Officer Wu looked at her with clean eyes and felt a bit disappointed. The powerful disguising technique can be so extreme that even close people may not be able to recognize it at a glance. And there is a kind of person in this world who has a natural ability to recognize people. As long as they have met someone, no matter how they change their appearance, they can still be recognized at a glance after many years. There is no such person among them, and if they specialize in criminal investigation, I wonder how many more cases they can solve. Recommend my concluding article, Beauty with Delicate Body and Soft Body vs. God of War with Cold Exterior and Hot Interior. In the eyes of the world, Shen Mingjiao, the concubine of Prince Su's mansion, is considered to be extremely beautiful. Prince Naihe Su is infatuated with Crown Princess Su Qing. Shen Mingjiao has been in the mansion for 10 years, and Prince Su has never stayed overnight in her courtyard. She even recorded her illegitimate child outside under her name, and in the end, she died in a palace coup. What a pitiful person. Shen Mingjiao. Where is she pitiful? Is the garden in the royal mansion not big enough, or are the days of buying and selling not enjoyable enough, or is the cheap sun not cute enough? If King Su wants to guard his white moonlight, let him guard it. This is a marriage where there is no need to sacrifice both mentally and physically. King Su is definitely a good husband of 20.4 filial piety. Shen Mingjiao, who had been reborn, originally wanted to walk the plot with peace of mind, but after blowing the newly dyed Ko-Dan, watching Su Wang miss the white moonlight seemed a bit unfair. Unexpectedly, the Prince Su, who had never looked cold at her in his past life, approached her on his own. Feng Lixing married Shen Mingjiao only out of sympathy. At first, it was assumed that the Wang family had added an extra pair of chopsticks. Later, seeing that the Wang family had gained vitality under her care, the group of rough men under his command could finally enjoy a hot meal. So, year after year, he gradually got used to having such a person in the royal mansion. He always thought that Shen Mingjiao was like the bright lights in the royal mansion at night, no matter how long he was away, she was always there. Until that day, he killed her all the way from the border to the palace, watching her lying silently in the pool of blood. At that moment, his eyes turned red and he went crazy. P.S. Double rebirth. The male lead is solely focused on dating. The female protagonist only wants to make a salted fish vase. End of this chapter. Chapter 10. The So. Called Silly and Sweet. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10. The So. Called Silly and Sweet. After asking all the questions, Officer Wu closed his notebook and said, Li Hong's lawyer wants to have a private conversation. The other party's lawyer said, as long as you give up the investigation, the suspect Li Hong will compensate you with 5 million yuan. Without leaving a trace, he glanced at Ji Wanwan's injured right arm. Out of sympathy, he couldn't help but advise. Ms. Ji, don't be too impulsive in everything. Don't argue for this breath, wait until this hurdle is passed, and then talk about it later. Ji Wanwan clenched her fists and, to put it plainly, Xiao Hong was just a chess piece of Bai Rou. As a nanny, where did she get 5 million? Bai Rou clearly knew that she didn't have any money at the moment, and that Yuyu was hospitalized and urgently needed money. Bai Rou is humiliating her in this way. If she accepts this 5 million yuan, she can quickly overcome the embarrassment of having no money and also take good care of her daughter's health. The condition is to let those who abuse their daughters go unpunished. She lifted her head and whispered, "Thank you for your kindness. We won't accept privacy anymore. I just want the person who abused my daughter to receive the appropriate punishment. It's not that she's aloof. After 4 years in prison, life was more difficult than death. She has long lost this kind of thing. If one day Bai Rou asks her to kneel in public to pick up money, she will kneel down without hesitation. But it's about her daughter, that's absolutely not possible, especially when she learns that Xiaohong is not just abusing her daughter, but really harming her life. Officer Wu seemed not surprised that she would answer like this, with some appreciation in her eyes. Okay, don't worry, we will handle it fairly. Yuyu sat quietly on the side, politely not interrupting. At this moment, Officer Wu took out a photo from his briefcase and handed it to Yuyu, saying, "Tell uncle, have you ever seen this person?" The woman in the photo is dressed in servant attire, with an ordinary and dull appearance. She is bowing her head and carefully pruning her flower branches. The photo is clearly taken from surveillance footage. This person's name is Wang Wan, and she is the maid responsible for taking care of the garden in the Ji family. Yuyu nodded, wondering how she wouldn't recognize the people in the Ji family estate. Then he reacted and looked at his mother hesitantly. Can we say it? The thoughts of the little man were all written on his face, and Officer Wu's eyes flashed through deep reflection, slowing down his voice and saying, "This is a big bad person. If a child knows anything, they must tell their uncle. As long as they catch her, they can save many children the same age as you." Yuyu put down the pink pig and blinked her big eyes, asking, "Even worse than the bad aunt who mistreated me?" Officer Wu nodded and said, "There is no comparability between the two in terms of their flaws." Ji Wanwan probably understood. She straightened the two small scratches on Jing Yuyu's head and said softly, "This can be said." The little person breathed a sigh of relief upon hearing the words, stared at the photo, and in less than an instant, remembered all the pictures about this aunt. This Aunt Wang Wan is a person with very little presence. Although she manages the garden on time every day, it makes people subconsciously ignore her presence. And Yuyu has rarely heard her talk. Seeing the little one frowning all the time, Officer Wu spoke slowly to guide her thinking. "Don't worry, think about what's unusual about her, such as whether she has had an argument with someone or changed her expression." Upon being asked this question, Yuyu's thoughts became clearer and she quickly filtered through the images in her mind. Before long, her eyes lit up. "Once, I was so hungry and uncomfortable. My bad aunt was in a bad mood and threw me into the garden rockery. I saw Aunt Wang Wan sitting in the corner of the rockery, holding a watch in her hand and probably even crying. Aunt Wang Wan stood up in fear when she heard the commotion, and her watch fell to the ground. There was a photo hidden in her watch." Officer Wu and the young policewoman behind him exchanged a glance, their faces clearly filled with joy. Originally, this question did not bring much hope, but unexpectedly, there was such a great harvest. The young police officer asked excitedly, "Do you remember what the person in the photo looks like?" Yuyu nodded and said, "Remember." At that time, she had just learned how to walk. Aunt Wang Wan's eyes were so scary when she turned around, but when she saw her, she suddenly returned to her usual honest appearance. The young policewoman said, "Children, wait a moment. Auntie, let's call the simulated portrait artist from the bureau over. Yuyu really wants to say that she can also draw." However, thinking of her mother's advice, she remained honest and didn't speak up. Ji Wanwan understood her daughter's thoughts in a moment and couldn't help but laugh inwardly. She hesitated and said, "I have learned some painting before. If you don't mind, I can help you." The young female police officer hesitated, and Officer Wu nodded with a smile, "Then please trouble Ms. Ji." At this moment, the young police officer also remembered that according to the investigation data, Ji Wanwan was once known as the #1 socialite in Haicheng. Not only did she excel in school, but she also won many awards for her hobbies such as drawing violin. Ji Wanwan took the paper and pen and looked at the pomelo. Yuyu held the pillow of the little bear and placed her hands on her chin, beginning to describe. "That's a big brother about 14 or 15 years old, with a square face and single eyelids." As Yuyu narrated, 15 minutes later, a slightly delicate face leaped onto the paper. Yuyu glanced at the person in the painting and then nodded frantically, her big eyes fixed on it. Mom's drawing technique is so magical. She hasn't learned this technique yet. A few simple lines are more three-dimensional than paint. The little man was immersed in the study of painting and couldn't extricate himself. After confirming the portrait, Officer Wu and others touched the head of Yuyu and left in a good mood. As she got into the police car, the young policewoman named Xiaofang couldn't help but say, "That little girl, isn't she too smart?" Those who work in this field are already more insightful than the average person, and according to their research, Yuyu was really foolish before. Even if it was just a head bump, the contrast between before and after was too big. Officer Wu stared at the portrait in his hand without looking up and said, "So what? As long as she doesn't do anything illegal, it has nothing to do with us." He has been working for decades and has never experienced any bizarre cases. He knows that there are so many people in this world who are favored by heaven in some way. After a while, he said softly, "It's not really strange. Think about the father of this child." Upon hearing him mention the man, Xiaofang also fell silent. The carriage was quiet for a while, and Xiaofang recalled the whole case curiously. He asked, "Captain, Li Hong admitted that it was Bai Rou who instigated her to abuse Yuyu, but we summoned Bai Rou. After investigation, it was found that Bai Rou only said, 'Take good care of this child,' to Xiaohong when Yuyu was just taken back to the Ji family, but Xiaohong was mistaken. Apart from this sentence, there was no money given to bribe or engage in any other activities." Officer Wu raised his head and asked in response, "Why do you think Bai Rou was unjustly accused?" Xiaofang was stunned for a moment, thought for a moment, and objectively said, "Probably because of the impression Bai Rou gave to the world." She sighed and said, "Bai Rou is a magical person. She lived an ordinary life for the first 20 years, until she met the young owner of the Lu Group, Lu Haochen. Life was like a cheat, even though she wasn't very beautiful and didn't have any outstanding abilities. Several famous young masters in Haiqing fell in love with her. Not only that, every time we encounter danger, we can always turn it around in the end." Until it was later revealed that she was the true daughter of the Ji family. Netizens call her a contemporary Cinderella comeback because she is really silly and has a large number of fans. Officer Wu sneered. "Silly and sweet. A girl who is helpless and good-looking, if she is really silly and sweet, will only have two situations. Unfortunately, due to lack of intelligence, one may be deceived by men and enter marriage prematurely. Or it could be finishing college and getting married on blind dates under the arrangement of friends and elders, living an ordinary life. Instead of thinking of being a nanny for the young master of the top wealthy family in Haiqing." A conversation awakened Xiaofang. Xiaofang smiled bitterly and sighed, "It seems that I am still too young. It's better for the captain to see through it thoroughly." That means it was really Li Hong who was instructed by Bai Rou. Thinking of the injuries on Yuyu's body, Officer Wu spoke coldly, "No matter what, we can't catch her. We pay attention to evidence when handling cases." As you said, Bai Rou didn't say anything else to Li Hong except for initially asking her to take good care of her. And Bai Rou can say that this sentence literally means that Li Hong herself distorted the meaning of her words. And another important reason why he is so concerned about this case is the facial contouring technique on Li Hong's body when he was arrested. According to Li Hong's account, she was disguised as Wang Wan, the maid in charge of managing the garden at the Ji family. Li Hong once helped Wang Wan with a favor, so in return, the other party helped her disguise and escape. The art of facial contouring is a natural representation of darkness that cannot be seen in light, and it is definitely something that ordinary people can come into contact with. That's the question: how could an ordinary gardener perform such skillful facial contouring techniques? Even though they acted quickly, Wang Wan ran away at the first moment when Li Hong was caught. My intuition after years of handling the case told him that he must spare no effort to investigate this Wang Wan. After several days of non-stop screening, Rao is ready and the results are still surprising. Wang Wan is actually a major criminal who has spread internationally. The crime she committed, if placed in ancient times, would be considered a light punishment even for Ling Qi. And she is very cunning. It's too difficult to catch her, mainly because of the forces behind her. which is a complete and terrifying criminal industry chain. Hand over the portrait to the people in the imperial capital. If you can really find someone, follow the clues and I don't know how many people can be saved. Xiao Fang nodded solemnly and couldn't help but look out the window at the blue sky. However, under this clear blue sky, there are many unimaginable darkness hidden. I really hope that after successfully capturing Wang Wan, those darkness can be reduced. What came to mind? She pondered and asked, does the captain think it's possible for Bai Rou to know Wang Wan? Seeking collection, recommendation, and review ***. Furthermore, it should be emphasized that this article is fictional, and there is no disguise technique or Wang Wan around us. It is all fabricated by the author. End of this chapter.